Ever walk by a building and, like, catch those awesome concrete details? Well, today we're going to dive deep into how that stuff gets made, thanks to some insights from RoleCatcher. And trust me, it's way more artistic than you'd think. We're talking precast molders and why it's so much more than just pouring concrete.
It really is amazing how they take something as basic as concrete and turn it into these intricate custom pieces. Like, picture a fireplace, right? The kind that just makes a living room. They make those, and it all starts with concrete.
So less pouring a patio, more like sculpting, but with concrete. Okay, I'm intrigued, but what's the day-to-day actually look like?
Well, they use these portable concrete mixers,
Yeah.
right? But it's not as simple as just tossing stuff in. RoleCatcher talks about how these guys, they're carefully choosing the aggregates, adjusting everything based on the weather, all to hit that sweet spot for the concrete, making sure it's got the right consistency, the right strength, for whatever they're crafting.
So there's a real science to it. That's so cool. But then they bring in the artistry, right? Like, how do they actually shape this stuff?
Molds. And we're not talking about those little plastic trays for Jello molds.
Yeah.
RoleCatcher mentioned some of these things can weigh over 100 pounds, like seriously heavy duty.
Wow. Okay, so they're wrestling with these massive molds and pouring concrete. I'm guessing this isn't a desk job?
Definitely not. RoleCatcher's pretty upfront about the physical side of things. These guys are on their feet all day, lifting those heavy molds, and often working outside, rain or shine. It's demanding, for sure.
But there's got to be a real sense of satisfaction at the end of the day, right? You're building something lasting, something people will actually use and appreciate.
Absolutely. That's a big part of the appeal. You're not just pushing papers. You're creating something tangible. That fireplace, that's going to be someone's cozy spot for years, and they had a hand in making it. That's got to feel good. And that sense of accomplishment, really comes through in RoleCatcher's research. But okay, let's get down to brass tacks. What's the career path look like for someone starting out in this field?
Yeah, how do you go from pouring that first slab to maybe running the whole show someday? RoleCatcher seems to think there's a pretty clear progression. You start entry level, right?
Right. And one thing I thought was cool, they don't just throw you to the wolves. It's more of an apprenticeship.
Oh, interesting. So like learning the ropes from the pros.
Exactly. RoleCatcher gave this example of like learning to use a pneumatic hammer.
Oh, yeah, for smoothing out the concrete, right?
Yeah. But you're under supervision at first, getting the hang of it before they let you loose on a big project.
Makes sense. So what makes a junior precast molder then? Is it just time on the job or is there more to it?
Well, experience definitely helps, but RoleCatcher highlights the responsibility factor. Like, a junior molder might get to tackle those patio blocks we talked about earlier, but they'd be in charge of making the forms, figuring out the dimensions, making sure the concrete sets right, all that jazz.
Wow, so they're not just following orders anymore. They're actually like problem solving, using their brains.
That's the thing, right? And then as you work your way up to senior precast molder, things get even more interesting. They might be overseeing those more complex projects, maybe even mentoring the junior team members.
Oh, cool. And RoleCatcher mentioned something about senior molders using design software. That doesn't sound very old school construction.
Right. That's how technology is changing the game. Instead of hand-drawn blueprints, they might be using software to make 3D models of what they're building. And a senior molder, they've got that practical experience so they can take those digital plans and make sure they actually work in the real world.
It's like they're bridging the gap between the digital and the physical. Okay,
Yeah.
that is so cool.
Totally. And it just shows how adaptable you have to be in this line of work. Even something like a portable concrete mixer, which seems pretty straightforward, right? RoleCatcher talked about how that's totally revolutionized things. It's not just about speed. It's about being able to get the perfect mix every time.
Right, like another layer of precision, right? Okay, so we've got technology, craftsmanship, and this drive to keep upping their game. And speaking of upping your game, RoleCatcher doesn't just give you info. They have some really useful tools if you're serious about this career path.
Absolutely. Their interview question database, seriously helpful. They have questions like, tell me about a time you had to solve a problem on a construction site. Being ready for that kind of question, that's clutch.
So good. And it's not just about nailing the interview, right? They have those resume and CV tools too, which can be a lifesaver.
What I like is they talk about how employers use the platform too. So while you're polishing your resume with their tips, a potential employer could be on there right now looking for someone with your skills.
Oh, wow. So it's like this whole ecosystem connecting everyone. That's awesome. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I want to circle back to something that keeps popping up. 3D printing.
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room. Or maybe we should say the concrete printer in the room. We can't talk about the future of this without thinking about how 3D printing might change things.
Right, because RoleCatcher only touched on it, but you can tell it's a big deal. Some people are probably like, is this going to replace my job? You know?
Totally understandable, right?
Mm.
But I think it's more nuanced than that. What if, instead of replacing jobs, 3D printing actually makes them even better? Like imagine a senior molder with all their knowledge, but now they got this technology to create designs that were impossible before.
So instead of being afraid of it, you embrace it and use it to take your craft to a whole other level.
Exactly. You could create those intricate molds we've been talking about, but with insane detail, way faster than traditional methods.
It's like you're not just a molder anymore, you're like a concrete magician.
Right. The possibilities are pretty mind-blowing.
And the cool thing is, it's not just about pushing the boundaries of what's possible artistically, right? RoleCatcher mentioned how 3D printing could cut down on waste big time.
Huge.
Yeah.
You're using only what you need, so it's better for the environment, and it saves money. Everybody wins.
Exactly. So we're looking at this future where technology and craftsmanship work together, making everything even cooler.
And it's not just precast molding either. This whole idea of using tech to boost those traditional trades, that's huge across the board. RoleCatcher talks about it a lot.
It's about being willing to adapt, to learn new things, which honestly is good advice for any job, right?
100%. Things are changing fast, and platforms like RoleCatcher, they give you the tools and info you need to keep up.
To kind of like carve your own path, just like those molders we've been talking about.
Exactly. So if you're listening to this and you've ever seen like a really cool concrete building and thought, wow, how'd they do that?
Hopefully, this deep dive gave you a little peek behind the curtain. It's not just about the final product, it's the skill, the creativity, the people who made it happen.
And hey, maybe it even got some of you thinking, hey, maybe I could do that, whether it's precast molding or something else that sparks your interest.
Because we've learned that these aren't just jobs, they're careers where you can be creative, solve problems, and, make your mark on the world, one awesome concrete creation at a time.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up. Hopefully we've given you all plenty to think about.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep those brains engaged, and remember, the coolest stuff is often right around the corner, just waiting for you to find it.